Welcoming a new member, Rachel pulled up to the neat, white frame house nestled on a quiet street in Willow Creek, a small town in upstate New York. The late afternoon sun softened the crisp edges of the porch, where a row of tidy potted plants and a bright red mailbox announced the Morgan household to the world. Inside, Rachel's heart fluttered with a blend of hope and anxiety. She glanced sideways at Mark, her husband of only a few months, who squeezed her hand and offered her a reassuring smile. He was her anchor in this sea of uncertainty. Willow Creek was a far cry from her noisy Chicago suburb. Here, neighbors waved from tidy lawns, and the local diner doubled as the town's unofficial news center. It was Mark's hometown, the place where he'd grown up under the watchful eyes of his family, especially his mother, Evelyn. As they lugged Rachel's suitcases up the walkway, the front door swung open. Evelyn appeared, her silver blonde hair neatly coiffed and a fixed smile on her face. She hugged Mark tightly, but offered Rachel only a polite, reserved greeting. "Welcome to our home, Rachel," Evelyn said, her voice warm yet formal. The scent of lemon furniture polish lingered as Rachel stepped over the threshold, feeling like a guest rather than a daughter-in-law. The interior radiated a kind of curated perfection. Family photos lined the hallway, most of them featuring Mark, class president, football MVP, prom king. Rachel tried to ignore the subtle curiosity in Evelyn's gaze as she introduced Rachel to the house rules. Shoes inside, no eating in the living room, always replace toilet paper the proper way. The rules seemed trivial, but Rachel sensed their importance in maintaining the order Evelyn so clearly prized. That evening, the family gathered around the dinner table for a home-cooked meal. Evelyn placed steaming dishes of meatloaf and green bean casserole, Mark's favorites, in the center. As the conversation danced between memories and harmless gossip about town, Rachel quietly observed. Mark's younger brother, Stephen, made jokes about their childhood, but Evelyn redirected the conversation each time toward Mark's achievements or the expectations she had for her boys. Rachel spoke little, careful to smile at the right moments, acutely aware that every remark, every gesture, could be interpreted as either a success or a misstep. After dinner, Mark helped Rachel unpack in their small upstairs bedroom. He promised her that his family would welcome her in time, that Evelyn just took a while to warm up to new people. Still, as Rachel looked around at the unfamiliar walls, the pressure to fit in and live up to unspoken standards settled heavily on her shoulders. Before she slept, Rachel messaged her best friend back in Chicago. That night, Rachel drifted off to sleep, wrapped in a tangle of anticipation and apprehension, realizing that joining Mark's family was the beginning of a journey she barely understood. A journey not just of blending into a new household, but of finding her place in a world full of traditions, boundaries, and the quiet but powerful expectations of her new mother-in-law. Unspoken rules. The first week in the Morgan household passed in a blur for Rachel, but the underlying currents soon became impossible to ignore. Every day seemed to reinforce that she was not simply joining Mark's family. She was entering a new world, governed by a code she could barely decipher. Rachel woke early each morning to the faint clatter of Evelyn preparing breakfast downstairs. The scent of strong coffee and just-baked biscuits wafting up the staircase. When Rachel shuffled into the kitchen, Evelyn was already immaculately dressed, rings glinting on her fingers, every strand of hair perfectly in place. "Good morning, dear," she would say, then make a thin-lipped note if Rachel poured orange juice before coffee or used a mug from the wrong hook. "Here, We always start the day with coffee. The mugs on the left are for guests. The correction was gentle, but unmistakable. By the third morning, Rachel began to notice patterns, subtle signals embedded in daily rituals. Shoes had to line up perfectly on the mat by the door. Heels facing out, not in. The towels in the bathroom must be folded in thirds, never halves. Even in the fridge, groceries were alphabetized on pristine shelves. Apples to the left, yogurt on the top row. A crooked milk carton drew a silent frown from Evelyn that stung for hours. The living room, a sunlit space filled with floral couches and antique knickknacks, was more museum than common area. Rachel quickly learned that despite its warmth, no one lingered there unless guests were present. Once, when Rachel settled in after lunch with a book, Evelyn paused in the doorway, her voice light but firm. "Oh, sweetie, the sofa is just for entertaining. We usually read in the study." Dinner was equally choreographed. Napkins were ironed, and precisely there was an order to passing food, clockwise, eldest to youngest, and a hierarchy in who spoke and when. Rachel watched as Mark and Stephen navigated these customs wordlessly. But she stumbled. If she reached for salad before Evelyn did, or laughed a shade too loud at one of Stephen's jokes, a glance from Evelyn would serve as quick correction. Evelyn seldom raised her voice, nor was outright unkind, but every exchange felt weighted. When Rachel accidentally left her muddy boots by the door, Evelyn said with a strained smile,
"Look, there's something I need
"We
to
try
tell
to
you.
keep mud outside, but I
wasn't
guess
entirely
things are done
truthful
differently
before."
in Chicago." An offhand comment on how Rachel set the table. "It's fine, but next time, the forks go on the left, just the Morgan's way." Etched insecurity into Rachel's daily routines. Beyond the rules was the unspoken expectation for Rachel to adapt without protest. When Evelyn hosted her weekly bridge club, Rachel was expected to serve drinks, replenish snacks, and blend into the background. If she tried to make conversation, her attempts were met with polite but curt nods. The message was clear. Her role was to observe, not participate. At night, Rachel unburdened herself to Mark, hoping for solace. He'd squeeze her hand and tell her to give it time. "She just likes things her way. You'll get used to it, I promise." But deep down, Rachel wondered if there would ever be space here for her way, or even for herself, as she truly was. The house settled into a rigid rhythm, every hour choreographed by silent instructions Rachel had to learn by watching, guessing, and often failing. Even her attempts to bond with the family were subtly redirected. When she suggested making her grandmother's apple pie for dessert, Evelyn smiled, but said, "That sounds nice, but let's stick to our family recipes for now." Slowly, Rachel felt invisible lines drawn around her in the Morgan household. The warmth she once hoped for was replaced by the pressure of invisible standards. And every day, without an outright compliment from Evelyn, felt like a reminder that she was still an outsider, an apprentice, learning her place in someone else's world. But Rachel wasn't ready to give up. Alone in her small bedroom, she began to write down these silent rules, determined that learning them would help her belong, or at least help her survive coldness and isolation. In the days that followed, an invisible chill settled over the Morgan household, creeping into the empty spaces between Rachel and everyone else. The sense of being an outsider, once a faint whisper in her mind, now echoed in every hallway and lingered in every interaction. Evelyn's careful smile had taken on edges, polite but distant, creating a wall Rachel could neither scale nor see through. Small gestures reinforced Rachel's isolation. There were family outings she learned about only after the fact, Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market, or spontaneous drives to the lake that seemed to happen whenever she was out for a walk or taking calls from her mother. When she tried to join Mark and Stephen watching football, Evelyn would appear, suggesting that Rachel might want to get some rest or help with chores instead. Often she found herself alone in her room, listening to muffled laughter floating up from the kitchen. Evelyn's techniques for exclusion were subtle but effective. She never publicly reprimanded Rachel or caused a scene. Instead, she employed a gentler arsenal, a forgotten invitation to family lunch, a passing comment about Rachel's supposed exhaustion, or an offhand remark to neighbors. Rachel's still adjusting. You know how stressful these things can be. Delivered with a sympathetic sigh. Each word sank Rachel a little deeper into her feelings of unwantedness. Mark, wrapped up in his work and the familiar patterns of his childhood home, seemed oblivious to the growing distance. If Rachel brought up her discomfort, he'd nudge her gently, promising that his mother would come around, suggesting patience as the cure. Mom's just set in her ways, he insisted. She'll warm up. She's not used to sharing her space. But as the days stretched on, Rachel felt the gap between herself and her husband widen, bridged only by routine conversations and perfunctory gestures. Family meals, once filled with town gossip and anecdotes, had grown quieter in Rachel's presence. If she offered ideas or asked questions, responses from Evelyn and Stephen were clipped, as though her words disappeared into the air between bites. Evelyn controlled the conversation, steering it away from Rachel's experiences or memories. She redirected attention to Mark's childhood, neighborhood news, or topics that excluded Rachel by default. Even holiday preparations became reminders of Rachel's outsider status. Her suggestions for new traditions brushed aside in favor of how we've always done things. What hurt most was Evelyn's ability to plant doubt and insecurity. She'd make pointed remarks barely above a whisper. Some things are just easier with family. Or sigh wistfully about past years when everyone just understood one another. Sometimes, after Mark left for work, Rachel would come downstairs to find Evelyn deep in hushed conversation on the phone, her voice soft and conspiratorial. When Evelyn would later laugh with a friend over tea, Rachel felt her presence shrink to the corners of the room. Even in public, the dynamic persisted. At church or neighborhood gatherings, Evelyn introduced Rachel as Mark's wife from Chicago, the label carrying a weight of difference. At the farmer's market, when acquaintances asked how Rachel was adjusting, Evelyn would answer for her, expressing concern about the stress and how these things take time. The gentle social cues circled back around, and soon even neighbors seemed to regard Rachel as someone fragile, unsettled, or simply temporary. On the few occasions Rachel reached out to invite Mark for a walk, to show Stephen a recipe, or to propose a movie night, her efforts fell flat. Mark was busy, Stephen had plans, and Evelyn needed silence to make her weekly phone call. Gradually, Rachel stopped trying, afraid that every attempt just wedged her further from the family she so desperately wanted to join. At night, loneliness pressed in from all sides. Rachel scrolled through old messages with friends, wanting to pour out her confusion, but afraid of seeming dramatic or ungrateful. Sometimes she drafted emails to her mother, but deleted them before sending, unsure whether she was overreacting. In the hush of her bedroom, Rachel replayed her days, searching for missteps she might have made, wondering if maybe she was the problem. But beneath the weight of doubt, a spark of defiance stubbornly remained. Each night, Rachel resolved to keep trying, to find connection, to prove herself worthy of belonging,
Mine.
even as the house around her
Finally.
seemed determined to keep her on the outside, looking in. Mounting pressure, Rachel's days in the Morgan household began to blur together, colored by a sense of mounting tension
Sweetheart, I
that
never
pressed
said
in
that.
from all sides.
You know how your
If she
memory
had
can
hoped
be
that things would
sometimes.
improve over time,
I'm worried
that
about
wish
you.
had long been suffocated by the ever-thickening air of scrutiny. With each passing morning, Rachel felt the walls of the house close in, as if its pristine surfaces concealed unseen eyes that tracked her every movement. There were no overt arguments, no outbursts, but a quiet, persistent tightening, the kind that made breathing itself feel like a misstep. Evelyn's control intensifies. Evelyn's regime, once merely rigid, grew ever more exacting. The rules multiplied. No running the dishwasher except after dinner. Hang the hand towels vertically, not horizontally.
Send the report to my email now.
Keep all windows closed, regardless of the
finally got
weather,
him.
lest
The market trend
the air
suggests a
brings
slight
in
downturn
pollen.
in the
Rachel
Actually, the
found
data
herself
indicates a stable
tiptoeing
quarter.
through the house,
Your analysis seems slightly
second-guessing
misinformed.
every action. Was this the right mug? Was her tone of voice deferential enough? Had she checked the mail promptly? Small chores became minefields, each one an opportunity for quiet disapproval. Evelyn rarely confronted Rachel directly. Instead, she wielded a sophisticated arsenal of indirect methods. The sigh, the tight-lipped smile, the meaningful glance exchanged with Stephen or Mark when Rachel forgot a household protocol. Each correction was framed as helpful advice. Just so you know, we always, back in my day, we would never. In this family, we prefer. But the underlying message was clear. Rachel's way was the wrong way. The emotional climate shifted as well. The banter at dinner disappeared, replaced by a procession of comments about what Rachel could or should be doing differently, always peppered with references to Mark's childhood. Mark liked his chicken cut like this. Or, Stephen never left his shoes by the door. It was as if Rachel's very presence was a constant breach of custom, her attempts to fit in only drawing more attention to every difference. Mark, caught in the crosshairs, gravitated inward, smiling a little less, spending evenings in his childhood room, as if regressing to an earlier, simpler existence. Rumors and character assassination. As the days droned on, the subtle slights began seeping beyond the walls of the house. Evelyn had a talent for weaving narratives that cast Rachel in a subtly unflattering light, without seeming outright malicious.
It's all right to be a
When
little
neighbors
messy
dropped
sometimes.
by with pies or flowers, Evelyn would put a gentle hand on Rachel's back, maneuver her to the background, and answer questions meant for her. She's still settling in. City life makes it hard to adjust out here. Or she tries, bless her heart. But some people just aren't used to our ways. Worse, Rachel started to encounter odd looks, impolite coolness at the grocery store, or on her walks. There were whispered greetings that turned into conversations she couldn't quite catch. When she approached, laughter would die down, eyes would avert. She overheard snippets about big city women being too proud, too restless, too quick to judge. Evelyn's allies subtly multiplied. Her bridge club friends clucked their tongues sympathetically whenever Rachel passed through with a tray of refreshments. City girls can be so high-strung, murmured Mrs. Drake between bites of lemon bar. Rachel realized Evelyn had never spoken ill of her directly. She didn't have to. The implication did all the work. Tensions with Mark and Stephen Rachel's relationship with Mark grew brittle under the strain. At first, Mark was quick to reassure her. Mom's tough on you because she cares, or she'll come around. But as time passed, He, too, seemed infected by the house's mood. Whenever Rachel broached her feelings, Mark would tense, sometimes deflecting with work, sometimes with a weary, "I just don't want any more drama." Their marriage felt increasingly like a performance, a series of polite exchanges crafted for Evelyn's approval. The private laughter and late-night talks that once sustained them shrank to whispered conversations behind a closed door, shadowed by exhaustion and doubt. Stephen, for his part, followed Evelyn's lead, alternating between casual indifference and faint amusement at Rachel's mistakes. He was always ready, with a teasing quip that, to Rachel, stung more than he realized. In moments when Rachel tried to share something from her own background, he'd shrug and say, "That's not really how it works around here." Over time, even Mark would let out a half-hearted chuckle, unintentionally aligning himself with his family and deepening Rachel's sense of isolation, gaslighting, and twisted narratives. Then came a series of incidents that left Rachel questioning her own sanity. One evening, Evelyn couldn't find her keys. She asked Rachel, who honestly hadn't seen them. Later, after the keys turned up in the laundry room, Evelyn offered a singularly pointed remark over dinner. "I've never been this forgetful before. Getting older, or maybe just distracted by all the changes in the house." Stephen and Mark exchanged glances. Rachel's cheeks burned. Another time, Rachel noticed a vase of fresh flowers she'd brought home from a weekend market sitting outside on the porch, wilted and forgotten. When she asked about it, Evelyn simply shrugged. "Oh, I thought you didn't want them cluttering the kitchen." Rachel bristled, puzzled. She'd never said any such thing. These small misrepresentations began stacking up, leaving her doubting her memory, her own sincerity, and her standing in the household. One afternoon, she noticed a text message thread between Mark and Evelyn open on the kitchen iPad. Her stomach dropped as she read a message from his mother. "I worry about her making you unhappy. Don't let her come between us." Mark's reply was tepid, non-committal, but the damage was done. Rachel felt the full weight of the house pressed down on her, physically and emotionally, escalating hostility and public perception. The tension seeped into every aspect of Rachel's life. She tried to attend church socials, hoping to make friends and forge some sense of belonging. But Evelyn was always there, greeting new acquaintances first, introducing Rachel as our city girl, still finding her country feet. At the church bake sale, Rachel's brownies sat untouched, while Evelyn's apple pie disappeared within minutes. Even attempts at camaraderie with other young wives in town fizzled as they exchanged knowing glances and polite but distant smiles, as if warning each other away from the troublemaker in the Morgan house. Her attempts to bond with Mark's extended family were met with similar resistance. Aunts and uncles gave her well-meaning but invasive advice. "Patience, dear, patience. Evelyn's a tough nut to crack, but she means well." Cousins told stories of their own run-ins with Evelyn, but always with a punchline that implied all would be well if Rachel just stopped resisting. Every conversation, every look, seemed designed to remind Rachel of just how precarious her position was. Sometimes she would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and practice smiling, holding her face until the expression felt natural. But nothing about her new world felt natural anymore. The weight of the unseen. Threat late at night, long after the house settled into silence, Rachel would replay the day's events, searching for clarity. She wrote lists of perceived offenses, tried to anticipate Evelyn's next move, and wondered if this endless pressure was meant not just to subdue her, but to break her down entirely. Even sleep offered no reprieve. Her dreams were filled with shadowy versions of Evelyn, whispering words that faded as she woke trembling.
God, are you okay?
But somewhere in the fog of anxiety, another feeling took root. Beneath the surface of her growing despair, Rachel felt a flicker of anger, a stubbornly surviving sense that she did not deserve this treatment, and that someday she might find a way to expose what was happening behind the Morgan family's perfect facade. For now, however, she could only brace herself
timeline doesn't
against
match
the
the suspect's
relentless
alibi.
tide, marking
I just
each small
cross-referenced the
slight
entry logs.
as both a
We have enough
wound
for a warrant.
and a warning. The unexpected
This is a
crisis,
wonderful
the
drawing.
summer air in
You did a
Willow
great
Creek
job with
turned
the
sultry
colors. Can you
as
tell me who this
August
is right
settled
here?
in, a heavy, expectant heat that shimmered off the maple trees and pressed up against the Morgan house's bright white walls. Rachel moved through her days in a haze. Her mind weighted by the countless small humiliations she endured under Evelyn's rule. She kept her head down, trying to avoid missteps, clinging to the hope that if she did everything perfectly, her place in the family might one day feel secure. One stormy Tuesday evening, the crisis began, insidiously, as most disasters do, with a lost envelope. Evelyn's voice cut through the clatter of thunder. Has anyone seen the cash I left on the hall table for the church fundraiser? Her words ricocheted through the kitchen, halting the faint rhythm of small talk around the dinner table. Mark looked up from his plate. Stephen shrugged, and Rachel, caught off guard, blinked in confusion. Evelyn's gaze landed on Rachel, searching,
complicated,
almost
sweetheart.
hungry.
But we'll figure
You were
this
in the
out together,
hallway
all
this
right?
afternoon,
We always do.
weren't you, Rachel? Did you move it? Maybe put it somewhere safe? Her tone was sweet, but with a brittle undercurrent. Mark shot Rachel an uncertain glance, and Stephen leaned back, crossing his arms as if preparing for a show. I saw the envelope earlier, but I didn't touch it, Rachel replied, her voice steady, though her cheeks flushed. She searched her memory. Yes, she'd walked past the entry table while folding laundry, but she was sure she hadn't noticed anything. She'd been vigilant about keeping her distance from anything Evelyn might later claim as territory. They all began to search. Drawers, kitchen counters, beneath couch cushions. The envelope containing nearly $500, earmarked for the church's building repairs, was nowhere to be found. With each passing minute, the tension in the air thickened. Evelyn narrated the search for Mark and Stephen's benefit. It's not like us to lose track of something so important. I put it right by the front door, first thing this morning. I suppose some people just aren't used to how we do things around here. As the night deepened and rain battered the windows, Evelyn's growing agitation permeated the house. She insisted on checking Rachel's purse, then her coat pockets, with a gentle apology. Just to be thorough, dear. You know how easy it is to forget. Under the guise of wanting to clear things up, Evelyn managed to make Rachel feel as if she had something to hide. By bedtime, the mood in the house had soured. Stephen whispered to Mark as they headed upstairs. Rachel caught only fragments. Money, weird, from Chicago. Alone in their room, Rachel tried to explain her side to Mark. I swear, I never saw it, Mark. Why would I touch it? The next day, Evelyn doubled down. The story grew each time she told it, subtly at first, then more overtly, until it was no longer about the envelope itself, but about trust. She inserted the story into conversations with her friends. We've just had a little mishap at home. Money disappearing. Can you imagine? It's such a strange feeling, not knowing who you can count on. I suppose it's probably nothing. Her words carried, as intended. At breakfast, Rachel noticed Mark's reluctance to meet her eyes. When Stephen arrived, he muttered a cold morning, barely, glancing in her direction. The sunniest spaces in the house now felt chilly and uninviting. Later,
Just this
Rachel
morning,
overheard
still covered
Evelyn
in
at the
dew.
door,
It looks
confiding
wonderful.
to a
I'll
neighbor
take 2 pounds.
who'd stopped by with zucchini bread. Rachel is new here, and I know it's hard to adjust, especially when things go wrong. I'm sure she means well. The neighbor's sympathetic clucks stung more than the accusation itself. The real blow fell 3 days later. The church treasurer, Mrs. Talbot, phoned to ask about the missing donation. Evelyn put her on speaker, explaining that unfortunately, someone must have misplaced it. She went on. Rachel was the only one home all afternoon. Maybe she moved it, meaning to help. The implication hung in the air, sticky and inescapable. That afternoon, Rachel's attempts at simple conversation were met with silence. Mark retreating to his office, and Stephen making himself convenient only for Evelyn's errands. The household felt like a jury in recess, with Rachel out on bail. At supper, nobody refilled her water glass. When she reached for the mashed potatoes, Stephen passed her by. Evelyn controlled the conversation, steering clear of any mention of money, except for one thinly veiled remark. It's so important to keep track of things, especially when everyone depends on you. Even outside their home, the atmosphere shifted. At the grocery store, Rachel noticed 2 women from church looking at her, their smiles fading into uncertain nods. The cashier was stiffer than usual. She left clutching her groceries with shaking hands, a growing sense of dread following her all the way back home. As the week dragged on, the steady drip of suspicion wore her confidence down to the bone. Mark became withdrawn, no longer seeking her out in the evening, speaking in short, tired sentences. He began spending more time on the phone with his mother. Whispered conversations late at night that Rachel only half overheard. But that
Emily,
left her
you
feeling
must trust
smaller,
your instincts on
less
this.
real,
The truth
with each
often
passing
hides in the
hour.
smallest
The
details.
few family members she called, Mark's cousin Christine, his uncle Leo, made polite noises, then urged her to just be patient.
gently,
Evelyn
just like
means
this.
well. Rachel
the
took to
paint goes
checking
on
every
smoothly?
corner of the house,
Am I doing it
retracing
right?
steps,
that's perfect.
hoping against hope that the
Freshly
missing
cleaned
envelope
buns.
might turn
Get your
up
skewers
and clear
right
her
here.
name.
Hurry up.
She tore apart the closet and crawled under furniture, her hope draining away with each fruitless search. Evelyn watched her with calm interest, never raising her voice, never directly accusing, but always lingering just long enough to witness Rachel's desperation. But what hurt most wasn't Evelyn's suspicions. It was how easily everyone else accepted the story. The speed with which trust withered, the hungry way people lapped up rumors, the way Mark's affection collapsed in the shadow of what if? Rachel's world narrowed to the boundaries of her small, upstairs bedroom. Even there, she didn't feel safe. One evening, she caught a snippet of Evelyn's voice on the phone. It's a shame. You just never really know someone, do you? It felt like a verdict. By the end of the week, Rachel was more alone than she had ever been. Her only company was a gnawing injustice she couldn't shake,
I need more
and the
blue
cold
paint over
certainty that whatever hope she had of being truly accepted in this house had vanished along with that envelope. In its place
really thought you could
was a
hide the cookies,
smoldering
didn't you?
ember of anger, a sense that if no one was coming to save her,
I almost got
she would
away
have
with
to
it, too.
save herself. Rock-bottom Rachel had never felt true loneliness until she lived in a house full of people who had turned away from her. After a week marinating in quiet accusations over the missing envelope, life in the Morgan home grew unbearable. The warmth she once felt, even the tenuous, brittle kind, had been replaced by frigid silence and studied avoidance. Where there used to be the steady hum of familiar routines, there now existed only a vast, echoing emptiness that pressed in from every corner. The days were long and gray, even when the sun shone. Rachel woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door, never pausing, never inviting her to join in. Breakfast became a one-sided affair.
It's finally over,
Sometimes she would eat alone,
You're safe now.
Evelyn having already finished, Mark leaving early for the hardware store downtown,
So big.
Stephen grunting his way out the door after swallowing his coffee. Rachel stared at her mug in the silent kitchen. The tick of the grandfather clock, a slow, mocking reminder of all the minutes she no longer belonged to anyone. Attempts to break through the coldness were fruitless. She volunteered to help with chores, offered to run errands, even tried to repair small things around the house. But everything she touched seemed to backfire. Dusting picture frames only resulted in Evelyn pointedly rearranging them, muttering that things have their place. Folding laundry brought a stiff, "We have our system here, Rachel, but thank you." Rachel's days developed the hollow rhythm of housework, carried out for its own sake. Each task erased as fast as she completed it. She felt herself disappearing into the very fabric of the Morgan home, present but erased. What remained of her connection to Mark withered in the cold. In the evenings, he retreated to his old bedroom under the pretense of phone calls or extra paperwork, often coming to bed after she had dozed off from exhaustion. The precious moments of laughter, whispered comfort, or shared stories that had once marked the beginning of their love seemed like artifacts from another life. When Rachel tried to broach the subject of the envelope again, Mark only sighed and stared at the ceiling, as if too tired to choose between his mother and his wife. "Let's just keep our heads down," he said one night, his voice barely audible over the hum of the bedside lamp. Rachel had never imagined marriage would feel so much like a test, taken in a language she hadn't been allowed to learn. Every encounter felt staged, her audience ready to see her trip, her critic waiting for proof that she didn't belong. She no longer felt simply unwelcome. She felt actively erased, as if each day chipped away a little more of who she once was. The scorn found its way beyond the home's walls. Neighbors, once warm, if distant, now offered only tight smiles and polite nods. At church, friends whispered behind her back, their words humming at the ragged edge of her hearing. "That's the girl from Chicago, you know, the one who..." At the supermarket, Rachel saw her own face, reflected in the black screens of turned-off phones, felt the weight of glances tossed her way, quickly retracted when she looked up. The world outside became an extension of her exile inside. She retreated into herself. Mornings found her curled on the window seat at the top of the stairs, eyes fixed on the street below, watching the mail truck rattle by or the children of the neighborhood ride their bikes in oblivious joy. She tried to keep busy, but her old hobbies, reading, sketching, baking, felt beyond her reach. Each slice of pie or neat drawing served only to amplify her dislocation. They were reminders of the life she had left behind, a city that now belonged to another woman, one with friends, laughter, and freedom. At night, despair pressed in the hardest. Rachel found sleep elusive, her mind caught in loops of regret and self-questioning. She replayed every moment since her arrival, her first nervous handshake with Evelyn, the forced smile over dinner, the endless corrections and admonishments. She cataloged her perceived sins, every misplaced dish or over-eager attempt at kindness, and found only more reasons to blame herself.
Welcome, everyone.
Some nights, she sent half-written messages to her best friend back home, but always deleted them before sending. Who would understand what it was like to become invisible, to vanish even as you struggled for recognition? And yet, in the depth of her despair, Rachel found herself growing angry, not with herself, but with the cruel machinery that had reduced her to this state. Evelyn's campaign of politeness as weaponry, Mark's silence, even the complicity of the neighbors and church friends. Each fresh slight added another brick to the wall that now hemmed her in. The injustice stung more sharply than her loneliness. She began to write, late at night, in a battered journal she had brought from Chicago. One page became 2, then 10, until she found she couldn't stop. She listed every instance of exclusion, every manipulative turn of phrase, every moment where the narrative had twisted to cast her as the villain. As days dragged into weeks, Rachel lost hope that the envelope would be found, or her name cleared. She accepted that the world she had entered was designed to stifle dissent, to erase anything that did not fit the Morgan ideal. One night, sitting alone by the window, Rachel caught sight of her, reflection, pale, wraith-like, almost unrecognizable. Her own eyes stared back at her, haunted, but burning with a trace of defiance. That small spark, half bitterness, half survival, kept her from surrender. She realized that to survive, she could not wait for rescue or understanding. She would have to steel herself out of necessity. She swore, quietly, that she would not let despair be her final state. If she could not rely on kindness, she would rely on memory, on careful observation, on the stubborn thread of her own self-worth. It was in these darkest moments that Rachel began to turn. Her sorrow no longer merely paralyzed her. It began to congeal into a wary sort of rage. She started to observe more, to listen for clues, and to piece together the silent alliances at play in the Morgan house. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out that did not require forgiveness or acceptance, but rather the courage to name what was happening and to reclaim her place in the story. For now, she stayed silent and watchful, nurturing the ember within. Rachel might have been pushed to the edge, but she would not be pushed over. Her despair had become, almost in spite of itself, a kind of armor. The counterattack, Rachel's transformation from sorrow to steel, was neither dramatic nor instantaneous, but a gradual solidifying, a hardening that took place quietly in the shadowed corners of her mind. If helplessness had become her daily companion, it was now edged with a new sense of agency, one born from the realization that survival would require something more than patience or hope. It was time for her to stop being the hunted and start becoming the observer, the collector, the architect of her own fate.
Honestly,
the first step was accepting what certainty she had left.
I don't know what I would
She
do
was
without
not
you.
crazy. She had not imagined the twisted smiles, the silences, the way stories about her took on a life of their own. The minute they left Evelyn's lips, Rachel began to see the house not just as a prison, but as a stage, one packed with clues, patterns, and an endless performance that needed only to be decoded. Creating a record. Late at night, when the house finally settled and she could hear only the sighs of old floorboards and distant train whistles, Rachel opened her battered journal and created what she called her record of truth. The act was more than cathartic. It was revolutionary. She would write down every conversation, every strange look, every misplaced object, or subtly barbed remark. She scrawled the date, time, and context until pages were thick with what read like the logbook of a ship passing through a storm. The process was empowering. For the first time since her arrival, Rachel felt a flicker of control. She moved through each day, alert and wary. She made note of who entered what rooms, who left doors ajar, which topics Evelyn dropped or steered away from. She paid attention to details, the way Evelyn's ringed fingers lingered on certain objects, the way Stephen's jokes became sharper when guests were present. Mark's tendency to withhold affection after talking to his mother. Rachel began to examine conversations for more than just words. She analyzed tone, body language, the choreography of gazes exchanged above her head. If Evelyn mentioned her hometown in a dismissive way, Rachel made a note. If a casserole dish went missing, she logged it. Whatever narrative the house wanted her to believe, she refused to accept a single, unexplained incident at face value. Strategic adaptation.
It wasn't.
But Rachel was careful not to show her hand. She played the part of the subdued, chastened outsider, watching as Evelyn continued her subtle campaign. She responded to barbed remarks with practiced neutrality. If Evelyn sighed about the missing envelope during bridge club, Rachel smiled politely and changed the subject, knowing every reaction was being measured. There was a new kind of freedom in feigned compliance. Rachel realized that by meeting expectations, she could move silently through the family machinery without drawing fresh suspicion. She took over cleaning duties, careful now to document the state of the home before and after her chores, snapping discreet photos on her phone, logging everything she moved or cleaned. She kept a digital backup of her notes as well, in case the journal ever disappeared. She also began gathering allies, or rather, sources of information. She listened more closely to other women at church, at the grocery store, and even on quick visits to the post office, by asking gentle, open-ended questions. How do you like Willow Creek? Have you known the Morgans long? She found she could glean little pieces of gossip, stories about Evelyn's history with control, and even whispers about past feuds within the family that had faded from memory. All of it went into the record, a growing web of stories and motives, subtle tests, and laying traps. Rachel grew bolder. She set small, harmless traps, moving a vase an inch to the left, swapping the order of mugs, or leaving a notepad by the phone to see if it would go missing. Without exception, Evelyn noticed, always restoring order with a pointed comment. Once, Rachel left her journal in plain sight, open to a benign page. The next day, she found it had been moved slightly, and a passage she'd written about a made-up, secret family recipe had been torn out. Rachel smiled grimly. She now knew Evelyn checked her things. Testing the boundaries at home, Rachel also sought confirmation outside. She quietly asked a trusted neighbor, Mrs. Livingston, whose husband was the town's former postmaster, if there had ever been other incidents involving missing church donations or misunderstandings in the Morgan house. Mrs. Livingston pursed her lips and whispered, "I'd keep a close eye, dear. Some folks around here have never liked sharing credit. Not everything gets lost by accident." Armed with these stories, Rachel started drawing connections, filling her journal with timelines and cause and effect chains. The envelope had disappeared just after she'd volunteered to help with the church fundraiser. A family heirloom had gone missing the day after Rachel had suggested a new way of organizing the pantry. Every accident seemed to fall in the wake of a moment when Rachel asserted herself, however gently. Mark's awakening. Part of Rachel's campaign involved trying to reclaim Mark's trust without arousing Evelyn's suspicion. She grew patient, inviting Mark to reminisce about their early days in Chicago, to cook or walk together, to remember the life they'd shared before moving in. Sometimes he melted into these
We're
memories.
gonna bring you home, Lily.
Other times, he
That's a
seemed
promise.
irritable and vague, as if some force in the house siphoned his affection away. To these moments, Rachel responded not with confrontation, but with gentle, factual reminders of reality. "I know this must feel overwhelming, but I need you to remember who we are. Remember what we've built." When Mark questioned a story or seemed uncertain, Rachel encouraged him to write down his own versions of events, even if he only did it sporadically. It planted the idea that there was another possible narrative. The plan takes shape. With evidence and confidence growing, Rachel waited for the right moment to strike. She resisted the urge to lash out or stage a dramatic accusation. Instead, she prepared for a larger confrontation, one where she could lay out, calmly and systematically, the constellation of manipulations that had warped her reputation. She decided to wait for an occasion when the whole family, and perhaps a handful of trusted outsiders, would be gathered. A moment when accusations could not be brushed aside as domestic squabbles. In the meantime, Rachel continued methodically amassing proof, documenting discrepancies in bank deposit slips, photographing the arrangement of objects before family events, even secretly recording a few especially tense conversations when Evelyn let her guard down. To most of the world, nothing had changed. Rachel remained the polite, wounded outsider. Only she knew the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Resolve. Each passing day, Rachel felt her fear evaporate, replaced by purpose. Her despair had been neither useless nor wasted. In its ashes, she found the grit to fight back with intelligence, subtlety, and integrity. She no longer waited for rescue, nor for Evelyn's approval, or even Mark's unconditional belief. She was gathering her courage for a counterattack, not just for herself, but for every hidden voice suffocated by an unspoken tyranny. In the secrecy of her tiny upstairs bedroom, between the hours of dusk and midnight, Rachel forged her plan, page by page, note by note, piece by piece. The old Rachel would never have dared, but the new Rachel, tempered by injustice and sharpened by quiet rage, was ready to reclaim her story. The truth unveiled. Thanksgiving approached, and the Morgan home bustled with activity unlike any scene since Rachel first arrived. The big event was to be held at the house this year, with extended family and a handful of church friends invited. A calculated display of tradition and hospitality, precisely the kind of occasion Evelyn relished. For Rachel, however, it marked the ideal moment, an audience large enough to witness the truth, with tempers and attention sure to flare. Evelyn ruled the kitchen with her usual precision, directing a symphony of tasks. Potatoes peeled, pies arranged, napkins folded into perfect triangles. Rachel quietly navigated the chaos, keeping her head down, careful to maintain her well-practiced air of docility. But her eyes missed nothing. She noticed how Evelyn redirected cheerful greetings meant for Rachel, how Mark seemed preoccupied and tense, and how little signals of the family's hierarchy played out in every glance and word. By noon, the dining room shimmered with good china and sparkling glassware. Relatives laughed and shared stories. Neighbors commented on the children's growth and the beauty of the old Morgan home. Rachel felt adrenaline harden her resolve. Her journal, pages swollen with evidence, dates, quotes, even a few printouts and photos, sat folded inside her bedroom desk, ready for the hour she'd rehearsed 100 times. Lunch passed in hazy, orchestrated merriment. It was as dessert was being served, Evelyn's signature apple pie, still steaming, that the first spark fell. Mark's cousin Chloe, a fast-talking newlywed from Buffalo, remarked offhandedly,
Take a deep breath,
"Hey,
Laura. Just tell me
didn't
what
I
happened."
hear
You didn't
something
mean
about
to.
a missing
It was an
fundraiser
accident,
envelope
I
a few weeks
swear.
back? Did you guys ever find it?" The table froze, forks poised in midair. Evelyn's smile barely faltered. "Oh, it was just a silly mix-up," she replied. "Sometimes things get moved around when you're adjusting to new faces in the house." Her eyes flicked, ever so briefly, to Rachel. Rachel held her breath. "Actually," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite the thundering pulse in her temple, "that incident was never resolved. And since we have everyone here, I hope it's all right if I finally clear the air.
Thank you.
Not just for myself, but for the Morgans in the church."
I love
Evelyn
watching
opened
you
her
play.
mouth,
Let's go on the swings
but
next.
Rachel pressed forward before she could reclaim control. Rachel drew a thick envelope from the pocket of her cardigan, her journal and proof bundled together. "I've kept a record," she announced, her voice calm but cutting through the rising noise. "Of everything. The missing items, the rumors, the way stories have changed depending on who's in the room. There's too much at stake and too much hurt for this to linger any longer." Someone laughed nervously. Cutlery clinked against plates. Mark's face was pale, his eyes wide. Evelyn's hands tightened on the pie server. "Rachel, this isn't the time." "No, Evelyn, it's exactly the time," Rachel interrupted, forcing herself to meet Evelyn's gaze. "For months now, I've been the topic of conversation. I've been quietly accused, left out, even made to doubt my own memory. But I'm done being silent." She began, methodically, laying out the evidence, printouts of bank statements showing the cash withdrawal for the church fundraiser, and the dates it was kept on the table. Photos on her phone of the table, time-stamped, showing the envelope was there in the morning and missing by the early afternoon, while Evelyn was home alone. Despite her claim, Rachel had been in the hall. Text transcript snippets she'd found on Mark's iPad. Messages from Evelyn to friends and church members, subtly insinuating Rachel's guilt long before any real investigation. A call log with several community members she had reached out to, noting past incidents of Evelyn's possessiveness and the coincidences of lost items when new guests or family threatened her control. And, last, a brief but telling audio clip. One evening, Evelyn's quiet voice, not realizing
Control,
Rachel
this
was
is
nearby,
I need
practiced
immediate backup at the
variations
woods
on,
near the logging road.
"We just can't be
The
sure.
situation is
I trust my
escalating
boys,
rapidly."
at least." The room fell silent as Rachel read, voice trembling at first, then stronger, each fact laid bare under the warm chandelier light. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The pattern was clear, and every page turned
know you're
was
scared,
another
but you need to tell
stone
me what
lifted
happened.
off her spirit.
Kill me if I talk.
She
I
finished
can't.
by looking around the table
We can protect
at
you.
Mark,
Just come out.
who stared in disbelief, at Stephen, eyes narrow and calculating, at Evelyn, who for the first time since Rachel's arrival looked utterly thrown. Chloe leaned in, frowning at the evidence. Uncle Leo, a blunt man, muttered, "That's pretty damning, Ev." Even a few of Evelyn's loyal Bridge Club friends exchanged uneasy glances. Evelyn, lips trembling, could only manage.
Dispatch,
"You
we're
went
bringing
through
the
my
suspect in
things."
through the main entrance.
Mark let out a long breath. "Mom, did you really spread those stories?" Stephen tried to laugh it off, muttering something about drama,
I can't believe it's
but was
actually
quickly
finished.
silenced
Me neither.
by the looks from around the
Best cup of
table.
coffee I've had all
For a
week.
long, aching moment, nobody moved.
Excuse me, Anne.
The
I just
air
wanted to
felt
thank you for
charged,
everything you've done
as
for
if the whole
community. It means a
house
lot to
were
us.
exhaling a
Appreciate
truth
that. We're just doing
it
our
could no
job.
longer keep. Mark, to his credit, walked around the table and put a hand on Rachel's back. A gesture small in itself,
Oh, thank you
but one
so
that
much,
made
dear.
everything inside her
These
loosen,
steps are getting harder.
just
It's
slightly.
my pleasure.
"I'm sorry,"
We're almost
he
there
said to
now.
her softly. I should have asked more questions. I let her tell me what to think." Evelyn retreated. Pie server set down with a soft clink. The matriarch who had once commanded every gesture and word in the house now found herself isolated, the center of the web pulled loose by the very woman she had tried to ensnare. Rachel took one last breath and turned to the guests. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. All I've wanted from the first day was a chance to belong. I shouldn't have had to fight so hard just to be treated fairly." The assembled family murmured amongst themselves, uncertainty and sympathy mingling in equal measure. The Morgan home no longer felt like an unassailable fortress. The truth, exposed at last, shifted every relationship at the table. As the gathering slowly began to break up, relatives pulling on coats or hugging goodbye in awkward silence, Rachel disappeared upstairs to her room for a moment of solitude. She felt light and unmoored, shaken but alive. The chains of rumor and manipulation had been broken. For the first time, she let herself believe that escape and even peace might be possible. Downstairs, the remnants of Evelyn's empire lay scattered amid breadcrumbs and half-eaten pie, silent testimony to the power of truth told at last. Consequences and confrontation. The night after the Thanksgiving confrontation, the Morgan house seemed to float in a stunned hush, as if the walls themselves couldn't quite believe the truth that had finally been spoken. Even the familiar creaks of old floorboards sounded tentative, reverberating through rooms where, hours earlier, secrets and dignity had shattered in equal measure. Rachel awoke the next morning to uncertain light and the scent of cold coffee hanging in the air. She lingered upstairs, listening. Gone was the rhythm of Evelyn's footsteps. No crisp orders, no clatter in the kitchen, no familiar clinking of china. It was as if the matriarch herself had retreated, taking with her the iron grip she once held over every aspect of the household. She descended the stairs slowly, wary of stumbling into hostility and ready glances. Instead, she found Mark at the table, gazing out the window, a streak of autumn sunlight painting shadows across his face. He looked up, his eyes searching hers for hurt, for hope, for anything she could spare. "Morning," he offered, his voice tentative. "Morning," Rachel replied, the simple word feeling like a tentative truce. They sat together in a silence that was softer, no longer heavy with unspoken accusation, but tinged with mutual exhaustion, even a reluctant relief. Evelyn's isolation. Evelyn kept to her room much of the day. The fortress of passivity she'd built for years now seemed to close in around her, a punishment harsher than any Rachel could have imagined. Even when she emerged, moving from room to room, she did so quietly, her movements stripped of their old decisiveness. She no longer commented on Rachel's chores or place settings. She simply watched, brittle and hollow, a queen without a court. Stephen and Mark noticed the shift, too. Stephen tried to maintain his bravado, the offhand jokes, the dismissive shrugs, but even he kept his distance. If he spoke to Rachel at all, it was with a wary neutrality, caution edging every word. Gone was the easy arrogance, replaced now by uncertainty and, possibly, a thin shadow of guilt. As for Mark, he moved tentatively through the weeks that followed. There were moments when Rachel found him lost in thought, perhaps mourning the uncomplicated family myth he'd grown up with. He apologized often, not just for his mother, but for himself. "I should have fought for you sooner," he said one evening when the house was quiet and the world outside felt impossibly large. "I was so afraid of making things worse. I ended up making them unbearable." Ripples through the community. The shock waves from Rachel's revelations rippled swiftly through Willow Creek. At church, the following Sunday, heads turned and whispers fluttered like autumn leaves. Some neighbors gave Rachel warm, if tentative, nods of support. Others avoided her gaze, embarrassed by their own complicity in silence. Mrs. Livingston squeezed Rachel's hand after the service and whispered, "It takes guts, honey. Not everyone would have stood up. Most just let women like Evelyn run things forever." The Bridge Club divided overnight.
Honestly, I wish I could
A
help
few
you out,
rallied
but
behind Evelyn, flashing her sympathetic glances, quietly suggesting that every family has drama. But others grew distant, exchanging uncertain looks that carried both apology and relief. Perhaps some part of them, too, was glad the Morgan matriarch's power had finally cracked. Meanwhile, Rachel received unexpected gestures, dropped off casseroles, notes of apology slipped into her mailbox, even a few invitations to coffee. The gestures brought a bittersweet comfort. She realized just how starved she'd been for kindness, how much she had yearned for a single sign that she belonged, and how many women in Willow Creek carried their own stories of being outsiders, of contending with expectations written long before their arrival. Facing Evelyn, days passed before Rachel found herself alone with Evelyn in the kitchen, the air thick with memories and regret. Dishes clinked quietly in the sink as Evelyn stood at the window, her reflection indistinct in the glass. "I suppose you think badly of me," Evelyn finally said, not turning. Rachel set down her towel. "I don't hate you, Evelyn, but I won't pretend things didn't happen the way they did." Evelyn's face, shadowed with fatigue, appeared older suddenly. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of losing my son. Afraid of losing this house, this order. I never meant—" She broke off, hands trembling just slightly. Rachel took a steadying breath. "You didn't have to lose anyone, but there's no belonging if it's built on someone else's suffering." For a fleeting moment, Rachel saw in Evelyn's eyes a vulnerability she'd never glimpsed before. Not contrition, exactly, but sorrow for a battle whose cost she may never have imagined. "I'm sorry," Evelyn managed, her words heavy, hesitant. "I lost my way." Rachel nodded. The apology was imperfect, but it was real. It was enough for her to unclench something inside herself, a small mercy for them both. Rachel's new standing. The holidays arrived, slowly, cautious, but more open. The Morgan home, for all its cracks, became softer in the wake of truth. Decisions, as mundane as holiday menus or weekend plans, were now shared. Rachel's suggestions were considered, not dismissed. She no longer felt the need to narrate or defend her every move. She could breathe, even laugh, and sometimes the sound felt foreign in her own ears. Some wounds lingered. There were days when Rachel caught herself flinching at an unexpected comment or dreading a neighbor's visit. The scars of suspicion and exclusion did not fade overnight. Yet she pressed on, gardening, sketching, reaching out to distant friends, and building thread by thread, a tapestry of belonging grounded, not in submission, but self-respect. Her marriage, too, began the long work of repair. Mark listened more patiently, asked instead of assumed, and let go, slowly, of the loyalties that had once kept him silent. They argued, sometimes, but the arguments became a way forward rather than a wall. And one night, as they sat together beneath the porch light, Mark laced his fingers with hers and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me, on us." "I almost did," Rachel admitted, "but not anymore." The changing house. Even the house itself seemed changed. Rooms that once carried tension now pulsed with an uneasy but hopeful calm. Family photos, once curated to perfection, became invitations for new pictures, ones with Rachel at the center, not at the edge. The Morgan house would never again be the fortress it had been under Evelyn's quiet tyranny. Instead, perhaps, it could become what Rachel had always wanted, a messy, honest, evolving home. On snowy evenings, Rachel sometimes caught Evelyn watching her, face lined with private reckoning. They would nod, two survivors living side by side, each making peace in her own way, a new beginning. As winter deepened, Rachel realized that survival was no longer her only goal. She wanted happiness, connection, not just a ceasefire, but a life fully lived. And as she gazed at the world beyond the frosted window pane, she understood at last that she had claimed something more than acceptance. She had rebuilt herself, brick by steady brick, on her own terms. And this time, she would not let go. Freedom and choice. December settled quietly over Willow Creek, turning the streets to silver and the old Morgan house into a mosaic of frosted window panes and gleaming icicles. Rachel awoke one morning to the hush of new snow, sunlight filtering through her curtains, gentle, forgiving, and bright. Gone was the sense of waiting for disaster. In its place grew something softer and stronger, a sense of morning-forged possibility. For the first time since arriving, Rachel allowed herself long, slow mornings. She sat by the window with her coffee, watching the world outside, while the house remained peaceful in its slumber. The town felt changed, almost as if the truth she'd fought so hard to reveal had settled in the air, lending her days an unfamiliar ease. No one whispered behind her back now, or if they did, it no longer troubled her. Neighbors met her gaze and smiled, sometimes warmly and sometimes shyly, as if searching for cues on how to move forward. Small acts of kindness dotted Rachel's life in unexpected ways. A cheerful wave from the mail carrier, a handwritten holiday card from Mrs. Livingston,
I know.
even Stephen's half-hearted but genuine effort to include her in the conversation over breakfast. The cautious respect she felt from the community reminded Rachel that belonging was not a prize to be won, but a relationship patiently mended day by day. Choosing herself. Above all, Rachel realized that freedom meant more than the absence of hostility. It was the reclamation of her story, the ability to choose what defined her and what did not. In that quiet space, surrounded by silence and snowlight, she began making choices that centered on her own happiness. She reconnected with old friends in Chicago, video calling on weekends, and filling her laughter with the easy rhythm she had missed so much. She dusted off her sketchbook, capturing Willow Creek's winter, the outlines of the Morgan house, and tiny scenes of daily joy. A steaming mug, the tilt of Mark's head under soft lamplight, the way the sunlight turned the curtains gold in late afternoon. She no longer felt compelled to seek Evelyn's approval at every turn. Instead, their interactions became civil, sometimes even cordial, but always defined by boundaries. Rachel said herself. Evelyn kept her distance, pride and penitence warring beneath her careful surface. Yet it was clear an unspoken peace had settled. There were no more sly tests or barbed comments, just small acknowledgments, respectful silences, and on rare occasions, a nod or gentle word that surprised them both. Forgiveness or not, as the days passed and the pressure to simply survive faded, Rachel found herself grappling with forgiveness, not the simple storybook kind, but something thornier and real. She carried scars, still vivid in the quiet hour before sleep. Strangers' rebukes, Mark's hesitation, and Evelyn's web of suspicion. Sometimes anger simmered up, unbidden, and she'd close her eyes and let it pass, unsure if true forgiveness was possible or even necessary. She took to journaling after midnight, unpacking the layers of betrayal and pain. In these pages, she allowed herself to grieve the years that might have been easier, the energy spent defending her own goodness. But she also recorded her victories, the day she stood her ground, the afternoon laughter returned to her marriage, the swift, quiet moment that she first caught a smile in her own reflection and believed it. She shared some of these struggles with Mark, who listened and sometimes wept for what had almost been lost. Other nights, she kept her reflections private, gifts only to herself. Forgiveness, she realized, would be a process, one not owed, but offered freely, as and when she wished. And for now, she chose to forgive herself first, for doubting her worth, for shrinking her dreams, for believing that silence was safer than truth. Freedom in love, her marriage grew stronger, not in spite of the ordeal, but because of the honesty forged in fire. Rachel and Mark began to talk openly about their hopes, disappointments, and the paths they wished to follow. They lingered over breakfasts, walked hand in hand beneath bare oak trees, and sometimes argued softly, no longer out of fear, but from a shared desire to build something enduring. Mark, changed by the upheaval, worked to become a better partner, attentive, curious, and less afraid to push back when old family dynamics resurfaced. He apologized again, unafraid now to look directly at the damage his silence once wrought. "I almost lost you," he whispered one night. "Thank you for saving us, even when I made it so hard." Rachel smiled, feeling not just relief, but pride. She had chosen honesty, even when the cost seemed unbearable, and was rewarded by a love that was finally, truly mutual. Redefining home. The Morgan house gradually shed its vestiges of silent control. Walls once lined with testaments only to Mark's childhood began to display Rachel's artwork, candid snapshots, and tokens of shared journeys. The kitchen filled with new recipes that mingled family tradition with Rachel's own, blending Chicago flavors and Willow Creek comforts. Laughter, tentative at first, then full-throated, echoed through hallways where fear had once walked. Rachel volunteered at the library, then at the community center, finding that helping others who felt like outsiders allowed her to transform her pain into empathy, her struggle into strength. She made friends who saw her not as a stranger or a subject of gossip, but as a valuable, complex human being. Every now and then, Evelyn would pause in the doorway, watching Rachel set the table or work her needle at the parlor window. Sometimes Evelyn's eyes softened. Sometimes they looked away. Rachel was no longer waiting for reconciliation. She was living her truth, and that, she realized, was the deepest kind of freedom. A final choice. As fresh snow fell on Willow Creek and the year inched toward its end, Rachel understood the enormous, ordinary gift of choice. She had chosen herself, chosen to reclaim her voice, chosen, even when it was terrifying, to stay rather than run. Her freedom was not a dramatic break, but a gradual unfolding, a promise to herself that she would never again be silent in the face of injustice, never again shrink to fit within the walls of someone else's story. That winter, Rachel wrote a letter to her younger self, the woman who had arrived, trembling and hopeful, at the Morgan home's red mailbox, believing love alone would be enough. In the letter, she wrote, "It wasn't just about surviving, or being accepted, or learning the rules. It was about making space for who you are. Fearless, stubborn, tender. Forgiveness is yours, to give or withhold, but your worth was never up for debate. You are free now, not because they let you be, but because you chose to be." She tucked the letter into a drawer, a private testament to what she'd won. On New Year's Day, as Mark pulled her close, while fireworks burst silently through the clouds, Rachel let herself hope again, not just for peace, but for a future she would shape on her own terms. In the tangle of family, forgiveness, belonging, and pain, Rachel had found her liberation at last. And as snow fell in Willow Creek, Rachel knew with certainty this beginning was entirely her own.